Now with all the latest stories making the headlines this afternoon, it's the ITV Lunchtime News.
Good afternoon. Russia has launched one of its biggest missile attacks on Ukraine in weeks, striking at power stations and other critical infrastructure. Air raid sirens rang out across the country this morning as the capital Kyiv and other cities, including Lviv and Kharkiv, were targeted by 69 missiles. The Ukrainian Air Force says most were launched from Russian planes and ships in the Black Sea. Martha Fairley has the latest.
It is a sound now all too familiar to residents of Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. As the day began, explosions could be heard across the city. A massive barrage of Russian missiles aimed at the country's power networks in a war of attrition. Anastasia, a medic on call, was forced to take shelter in a metro station, but is growing weary of the constant attacks. We are just tired of this, she said. Yes, we are trying to react and go to the shelter, but this interrupts our life. We don't know how long the war will last. It's hard to be afraid every day and put your life on hold. Other cities also came under fire. Above Lviv, near the Polish border, there were smoke trails from missile attacks that have left 90% of the city without electricity.
I think it's important to note that the targeting of civilian national infrastructure and indeed civilian areas is against the Geneva Conventions. Russia is breaking international law in what it's doing, not only with its invasion, but also with the targeting it's carrying out. And there will be a response from the rest of the world to that type of behaviour.
Taking shelter is now a part of daily life. No immediate deaths have been reported from the 69 Russian missiles fired. 54 were intercepted. But this is one of the biggest waves of Russian strikes on Ukraine since it began its attacks in October. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Merseyside police have arrested a third person in connection with the murder of a woman in a pub on Christmas Eve. 26-year-old Ellie Edwards was shot in the head at a pub in Wallasey. Detectives say she wasn't the intended target. Officers are now questioning two men in their 30s and a 19-year-old woman. There's also been a third arrest in connection with the Boxing Day murder of footballer Cody Fisher, who was stabbed to death in a Birmingham nightclub. Police arrested the new suspect early this morning in London. And the government says there are no plans for mandatory COVID tests for people travelling to the UK from China. The United States is the latest country to impose tests since a surge in Chinese cases. The new General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, the TUC, has told ITV News that unions will not be backing down from strike action in their dispute over pay. Paul Novak was speaking to our political correspondent Tom Sheldrick, who joins me now. Tom, there's a new boss of this big group that most unions belong to, but that stalemate seems to be going on.
Yes, Paul Novak comes in amid the biggest wave of industrial unrest in a generation. But speaking to him today, there was no sign of any real change in the trade unions' approach. They are demanding significant pay rises amid the rising cost of living. And indeed, the new leader of the TUC has accused the government of sabotaging efforts to resolve these disputes by not getting around the negotiating table.
Well, I think it's the government that needs to take a different approach. Unions have been very clear from the outset of these disputes. They're prepared to sit down and negotiate pay with ministers and with public sector employers. Well, there can't be movements unless there are talks, and the government has refused to engage in meaningful pay talks with our unions. I don't know how they think they can resolve a pay dispute without having talks.
Well, the government argues that it has agreed to the recommendations made by independent pay review bodies and that double-digit pay rises would embed inflation. Some border force staff are among those on strike again today, and further significant strikes have been planned for January by NHS and rail workers. The new TUC leader told me that it makes sense to consider more coordinated walkouts across different sectors and unions in the new year, but it doesn't look like that's been fully worked out yet. As the stalemate continues, though, so does the disruption.
Thank you very much, Tom. In America, National Guard troops are going door to door in New York State, checking on people who lost power during recent massive snowstorms. At least 60 people are thought to have died, and there are fears more victims could be found. Meanwhile, another fierce storm has hit the US West Coast. Jay Akbar reports.
In the United States, paralysed by an apocalyptic snowstorm, the cleanup had barely begun on the East Coast when another deadly threat struck the West. From California up to Washington, a new system battered the coast with winds topping 100 miles per hour. In Oregon, locals woke to flooded roads and trees ripped from the ground. Highways in Portland had to be shut, while San Francisco saw 4 inches of rainfall in just a few hours. This new weather system, known as an atmospheric river, has made an already dreadful week much worse. At least 60 are believed to have been killed in the so-called bomb cyclone which paralysed much of North America, 34 of them in the city of Buffalo, New York alone.
The loss of life during this winter storm is a very, very painful thing. For all of us, we are heartbroken. This was a historic storm, probably the worst storm that the city has seen in over 50 years, and perhaps, maybe, the worst storm in recorded history.
Even now, as the snow begins to clear in parts of New York, officials fear it could cause floods. Only after it clears will we know the true death toll from this cataclysmic storm. Jay Akbar, ITV News.
And that's it from me. Lucrezia Millarini will be back with all the latest developments at 6:45. Have a great afternoon.